Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in sophomore English. We turn now in our Unit 1 study to the very last title in Unit number 1, where, just to remind, our big question, is there a difference between reality and truth? We just finished with our study of Like the Sun, and now we will turn to Saki's classic, The Open Window. I'm with you in your hymnals, by the way, on page 188, 189, before we jump to page 195 in the actual story. Hey, there's two things I want to point out for your annotations. First of all, make sure at 2B that you have there again the discussion of irony and the three kinds of irony. Situational irony, just to remind, an event directly contradicts strong expectations. Verbal irony, a character says the opposite of what he or she really means. And dramatic irony, the reader, you, knows something a character does not, right? Now, these don't have to be mutually exclusive in a story. I mean, we can have more than one of these. We also, by the way, notice, will have paradox, a statement that seems contradictory, but actually reveals a deeper truth, right? So as we get into this text as well, we'll play that same game. Now, we are looking at one of the greatest short story writers of all time, Saki. I'm with you on page 189, 1870 to 1916. By the way, in your freshman year, let's jump to 3A. That's actually where we'll start at 3A. You'll remember in your freshman year a story called Interlopers, about two guys that hate each other's guts out in the woods trying to kill each other. A tree falls on both of them, and they become, over a period of the next few hours, friends. And then they think they hear someone coming to rescue them, and the very final word of the story was, "You're right, wolves." And that's the kind of story that will lay in the back of our mind. Remember, our learning theory is to connect new information to old information. That Saki story, Interlopers, is an old piece of information. By the way, if you don't remember that one, go to learnstrong.net, go to the freshman folder, scroll down and find that one so you can be reminded of it. Let's say something about Saki here. Saki, by the way, is the pen name of Hector Q. Munro, okay? Born to British parents in Burma, Myanmar. Saki lived in England for most of his life. He began his career writing political satires for newspapers and later turned to fiction. Today, Saki is best known for his witty, sometimes cruel short stories, many of which feature humorous surprise endings. Write that down at level 1. The surprise ending, and at 2B. The surprise ending is really important. Many writers consider Open Window to be one of the best examples of Saki's style. And there's a big debate about whether, it's this one or Interlopers. Both of them are wonderful, wonderful examples of this. All right, here we go. Open Window. Let's go to work, right? Enjoying the ironies of this text, all right? Follow along and enjoy the text. Here we go.
The Open Window by Saki, H. Munro. "My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall," said a very self-possessed young lady of 15. "In the meantime, you must try and put up with me." Frampton Nuttall endeavored to say the correct something that should duly flatter the niece of the moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do much toward helping the nerve cure which he was supposed to be undergoing. "I know how it will be," his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. "You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all the people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice."
Page 196.
Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Sappleton, the lady to whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came into the nice division. "Do you know many of the people round here?" asked the niece, when she judged that they had had sufficient silent communion. "Hardly a soul," said Frampton. "My sister was staying here at the rectory, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here." He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. "Then you know practically nothing about my aunt?" pursued the self-possessed young lady. "Only her name and address," admitted the caller. He was wondering whether Mrs. Sappleton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. "Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago," said the child. "That would be since your sister's time." "Her tragedy?" asked Frampton. Somehow, in this restful country spot, tragedies seemed out of place. "You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon," said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened onto a lawn. "It is quite warm for the time of the year," said Frampton. "But has that window got anything to do with the tragedy?" "Out through that window, 3 years ago to a day, her husband and her 2 young brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor to their favorite snipe shooting ground, they were all 3 engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. It had been that dreadful wet summer, you know, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the dreadful part of it." Here the child's voice lost its self-possessed note and became falteringly human. "Poor aunt always thinks that they will come back some day, they and the little brown spaniel that was lost with them, and walk in at that window just as they used to do.
197.
That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Poor dear aunt. She has often told me how they went out, her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing, 'Bertie, why do you bound?' as he always did to tease her, because she said it got on her nerves. Do you know, sometimes, on still, quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they will walk in through that window." She broke off with a little shudder. It was a relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled into the room with a whirl of apologies for being late in making her appearance.
All right, let's pause, write it down at level 1. Interesting little story, very quick and to the point. We have a man who shows up, I'm on page 195, Mr. Nuttall. He's going to show up in the country. His sister has given him what we call letters of introduction. In other words, go to people's houses, present yourself with letters of introduction. I know them, they know me. That way you at least have some kind of social engagements. By the way, put it in your notes at level 1. This is huge. Nuttall has a nerve condition. Okay? When he shows up, there's a young 15-year-old girl in the room where he walks into, and the window is open that looks out onto the backyard, basically, all right? Large window. She ascertains quickly that he has never met her aunt. And so the young girl, by the way, put it in your notes, her name is Vera, okay? Her name will be Vera. We'll find that out later. Vera says, you might wonder about what's up with this open window, and the answer is really kind of tragic. My poor aunt, she commemorates the death of the ones she loves. They went off hunting and never came back, fell into the swampy, marshy area and never came back. But she's always hopeful that maybe someday they will come walking back through this window along with their puppy dog. And then the child gets kind of like freaky and says, you know, sometimes I almost feel like I'm going to see them come back. And Mr. Nuttall, the man who has a nerve condition, is already a little bit edgy anyway, when all of a sudden into the room comes the aunt. Now you can imagine the way he's going to look at the aunt like, oh, she thinks dead people are coming back to life. What a strange woman she must be. All right, let's enjoy now the ending of the story. We said that Saki loves his surprise endings. Let's enjoy this surprise ending.
I hope Vera has been amusing you, she said. She has been very interesting, said Frampton. "I hope you don't mind the open window," said Mrs. Stapleton briskly. "My husband and brothers will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. They've been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess over my poor carpets. So like you menfolk, isn't it?" She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting and the scarcity of birds and the prospects for duck in the winter. To Frampton, it was all purely horrible. He made a desperate but only partially successful effort to turn the talk on to a less ghastly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him to the open window and the lawn beyond. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. "The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest, an absence of mental excitement, and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise," announced Frampton, who labored under the tolerably widespread delusion that total strangers and chance acquaintances are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments and infirmities, their cause and cure. "On the matter of diet, they are not so much in agreement," he continued. "No?" said Mrs. Sappleton, in a voice which only replaced a yawn at the last moment. Then she suddenly brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. "Here they are at last," she cried. "Just in time for tea, and don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes?" Frampton shivered slightly and turned toward the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. The child was staring out through the open window with dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of nameless fear, Frampton swung round in his seat and looked in the same direction. In the deepening twilight, 3 figures were walking across the lawn towards the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulders. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Noiselessly, they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk, "I said, Bertie, why do you bound?" Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat. The hall door, the graveled drive, and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the hedge to avoid imminent collision. "Here we are, my dear," said the bearer of the white mackintosh, coming in through the window. "Fairly muddy, but most of it's dry. Who was that who bolted out as we came up?" "A most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall," said Mrs. Sappleton. "Could only talk about his illnesses, and dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost."
Right?
"I expect it was the spaniel," said the niece calmly. "He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery somewhere on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs, and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him, enough to make anyone lose their nerve." Romance at short notice was her specialty.
The threads.
Now, the genius of this story, and let's put this in our notes right away, is it's obviously multi-layered. But let's ask this question. Who is the central character of this story? Write that down in 2B really quickly. All stories have characters. We have several in this story. Who is the central character of the story? And of course, the answer is, interestingly, it's the one who's referenced in the very final line of the story. Vera is the central character of this story. We, of course, as readers, are led to think initially that it's going to be Mr. Nuttall, who has a nervous condition, has gone into the country to convalesce, is going around visiting some of the friends of his sister, and he has shown up at this house. He has no idea when he introduces himself to Vera that she's going to do what? play head games with him big time, right? That is to say, she all of a sudden receives this guy and says, oh man, I can have some fun with this guy because I know that all of a sudden some guys are going to come walking up here in a second from hunting. I'm going to play a whole game with his head and just see what happens. Of course, let's ask now some interesting questions at 2A. What is the major theme or message of a story like this? Go ahead, jot down what you think is the major message or theme. Some students will say, this is a story that says people are often very vulnerable and therefore they can be fooled easily. This poor guy thinking that in fact he just saw a ghost walk up on the green, and the dog of course and all of that. There is as well another major message here that things are not always what they appear. Notice your big question, is there a difference between truth and reality? And obviously here we would say, yeah, maybe there is a major difference in our story. How about level 2B? How does this story work for you? What is it that makes this story ironic? Notice right up until the end of the story, and this is the genius, right, of Saki's work, right up until the end of the story, you as a reader, you really don't know what's going on either. In other words, Saki's having a bit of fun on you, just like Vera is having a bit of fun on Nuttall, right? That is to say, you don't really know until the very end of the story what actually is going down. You don't know if it's a legit ghost, and this is a ghost story, or if Vera's basically having a bit of fun on you as well. And then you do one of these numbers, which immediately changes the story for you to think about Vera. That is to say, wow, she can spin a story quickly. Notice at the very end, I'll tell you why he ran off. He told me that he had a terrible fear of dogs because he was in this situation in India and blah, blah. She can just spin it really quickly. Notice the very final line, romance at short notice. The word romance actually stands for what? Jot it down in your notes. The word romance. Romance at short notice was her specialty, Vera's specialty. Well, what really is romance standing? Lying, right? She's really good at spinning a lie really quickly, and all of a sudden she can create a whole nother story. Very interesting. The open window, of course, then becomes a symbol of what? How would you say it? Incredulity, the inability to always be able to tell fact from fiction, reality from something else. Jump to 3A really quickly. How, if you remember the story, interlopers, how is this story and that story similar? We might say the surprise ending, right? What is your favorite text or film about the best liar that you know? The best one to spin a story? Finally, at 3B, what is for you a moment in your biography when you were taken the way that Vera takes Nuttall here? Can you jot down a moment when, oh, dude, you got totally messed with. You thought something was legit and somebody was having a bit of fun with you and you got totally freaked out about that? Of course, there's another 3B question. How good of a liar are you? Are you like Vera? Can you spin a story really quickly? Another correlate. To what degree are you like Nuttall and you're kind of gullible? Are you a more gullible person? In other words, people can kind of mess with you. Sophomores have often pointed out that by their sophomore year, they're not as gullible as they were in their freshman year. And that is to say, in the freshman year, you could probably have, maybe jokes played on you that don't work so well in the sophomore year. I remember many years ago at Worland High School that I had a colleague who loved to play a game, usually with some freshman, and all of a sudden on the first day of school, a knock at my door, and the student would be standing there saying, Mr. Riekert needs his board stretcher, and he sent me to ask for it. And to take part in the game, I would have to ask, board stretcher? Yeah, you know that instrument where you put a piece of wood in it and it can stretch it to make it longer so that way it can meet our expectations? And I would say, oh, the board stretcher. I think that one belongs to Mr. Dupree way down the hall at the other end of our school. And of course the student would show up at Mr. Dupree's and he would send the student to the opposite end of the building to pick up that board stretcher, waiting to see how long it would take the poor little freshman before the poor little freshman figured it out. oh, there is no such thing as a board stretcher. That's ludicrous that you can stretch wood. They're all having a bit of fun with me. That kind of thing can happen in your freshman year, but not so much in your sophomore year. Where do you come down on that continuum? Are you the one that goes in search of the board stretcher, or are you the one that asks for the board stretcher to be found? That is to say, are you more Vera or are you more Nuttall? We will finish our study here in a second by coming back to take a look on YouTube at a great video performance of this. This is a text which has been turned into film a number of times, just simply because of the powerful effect of watching as Nuttall, of course, gets jacked with by Vera. Come back in a moment. We'll mess around with that and enjoy that view. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you.